Hi everybody and welcome to the third edition of the Property AI Report. My name is Mal McCallion. I'm your host here to walk you through this week's events in all things property and AI technology. First of all, let's start as always with property news. First up in our property news section, we're going to talk about a single brand in our market, and that brand is Foxtons. Now, often synonymous with some of the least desirable and attractive traits of estate agents over the years, Foxtons became a sort of byword for excess and braggadocio and all these traits that were cried by the general public as being quite outdated, of being too salesy. And it's been quite a remarkable turnaround for the business over the last couple of years since its CEO, Guy Gittins, was appointed. I know that he's had the strong backing of Peter Rollings, who's on the board, and Peter was also instrumental in the growth of Foxtons right at the start, alongside the owner, John Hunt. So it's a really fascinating, almost back to the future feel to the business, and particularly around the way that it's re-emerged as a business with purpose. And I think if I was looking at this business and was an estate agent myself and running a business, then I would think that what Guy, Peter and co have been able to do is to really establish its kind of soul again, its ability to differentiate itself, to tell people who it is and what it stands for. And it's really hard, but there are certain things that they have done exceptionally well. One is to really focus on its team. So you can see from a lot of the quite hilarious LinkedIn posts that come out where they take all of their teams away to sunny places and stick them on yachts. And then they give them, there's the other ones which are all about if they do certain level of sales, then they get cars and so on. So it's a really brilliant way of emphasizing what it is that you stand for. And I think one of the things that I look around, and I've got kids who are 18 and 16, and it is difficult in current times to find that purpose and that community as well, a kind of real feeling of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I think that what they've built there at Foxtons is this kind of feeling that all the young people and the energy and the whole kind of vibe is all around celebrating success and really pushing as hard as you possibly can to get those extra deals in, to get that extra sale. And I think that there's a lot to learn there, a lot to love as well, because I do think that whether it's COVID, whether it's just the kind of natural atomization via social media, there does seem to be a need for perhaps young humans to connect and to find something that they can really believe in and work hard for. And this, I think, has been nurtured as part of the Foxtons culture over recent times, and it's paying off. So their results last week, 36% up the third quarter compared to the previous year. On track, it seems to hit Guy Gittins' target of sort of 25 million to 30 million of profit over the next couple of years. There's still a bit of sort of saber rattling in the background from some of their largest shareholders who back in sort of May time were pushing for it to be sold before the end of this year, 2024. So it remains to be seen whether actually this stellar performance is the knockers on that for now, and they're just going to sit tight as shareholders. But there's a lot of talk in the city of making their shares a buy. And I think that it's a really good story of what you can do if you really focus hard on the basics. And that is your team, that is your brand, and that is your operation. And your operating model. And I just think if we're looking at, again, the sort of future of estate agency, it's fascinating and a little bit hilarious to think that it's actually very similar to what the best agents have always been doing, right? Which is, again, focusing on their people, focusing on their brand, and focusing on their operational processes. Yeah, congratulations to them. Really good work. And I think it's a really strong indicator of just how good things can get if you really know what your core priorities are and how you're going to get there. In other property news, a survey was released last week showing that of 4,000 people, fewer than half of 18 to 34-year-olds trust estate agents to give them an accurate valuation of their home. And that compares with 65% of 35 to 54-year-olds and nearly 75% of those over 55. So it's interesting to just muse on why this survey took place, who it might involve, and why these questions were being asked of them. It's actually run by a company called Upsticks, who are an iBuyer. And perhaps not shockingly, one of their questions is the percentage of people that have turned to an online iBuyer to sell their home quickly for cash. That says that for young people, as in 18 to 34, more than 1 in 10 claim to have turned to an iBuyer to sell their homes. So look, ignoring, as we must, the sort of the driving force behind this, which is clearly to get people thinking about iBuyers, it is actually just interesting that they've managed to find so many people to answer this question. This survey, 4,000 is a lot of people. Normally a kind of representative sample of 1,000 is all you need. Yeah, fair play to them for going that far and that deep. However, it does make you wonder a little bit about the kind of the volume of 18 to 34-year-olds who have looked to sell properties. It is, you know, a matter of record that the average age of first-time buyers is now above 34. So presumably this was a relatively small sample compared with the rest of it. And also the fact that they are saying that they're more skeptical of estate agents, you've got to take with a bit of a pinch of salt. Nonetheless, it's still interesting that these numbers have come through. And I do think that iBuying is an interesting strategy, is an interesting kind of part of the market. Over in the States, people like Zillow were doing it for a little while, though they stopped because essentially in a down market, you're looking at potentially holding assets that are going to depreciate in value quite a lot, quite quickly. So yeah, for us over here, it's not really been a thing. Nested did it for a while as well, and before they became a sort of self-employed agent. But it's, yeah, giving options to people to transact on their properties, I think is always helpful, provided it is done openly, transparently, with integrity. But yes, it'll be interesting to see where these guys go. They've been around for a little while, Upsticks, and obviously the fact that they released this big survey suggests that they're getting reasonably aggressive from a growth and PR point of view. But yes, going to be interesting to see as the market develops over the next year or so, whether these guys are going to make a big play and what their sort of strategy is. Interestingly, it's backed by and run by and founded by a guy called Robin Patterson, who was heavily involved in the likes of Hamptons International when that was sold a few years ago. Yes, you know, credible players in the industry and interesting business model as well. And we'll continue to keep an eye on them and keep you up to date with what's going on. Next up, the sad news of the passing of Sarah Edmundson. Now, I was at the Esters a week and a bit ago, and Verona Frankish was up on stage from Women in the Estate Agency, talking very movingly about Sarah's impact on that group and on the wider industry as well. And actually had Sarah on a phone. She was watching on from where she wasn't very well, obviously. It's really tragic to hear that she passed away last week. Now, I don't know her very well. I've obviously been around the industry long enough to have seen her in various events and so on, and she's always been lovely and friendly. But yes, listen, it's obviously a real tragedy, and she's gone too soon. She was a real asset to the industry at large, and yes, it's desperately sad. And I really feel for all of those that knew her and knew her well. Rest in peace. Now, for the second half of the podcast, we're going to dive into AI and tech. First story is all about a business called Perplexity. Now, Perplexity is essentially a kind of search engine for AI. So what it can do is you can type in any question and it will go off and essentially do your Google searches for you, bring you back a nice summary of all of those Google searches with some links. And it's a precursor to what Google is trying to do themselves with their AI overviews, trying to ensure that people can find what they need to find quickly, that it's got references so that it doesn't make stuff up. But it's come under a lot of pressure because by enabling people to find all this information, it means that they don't actually have to go to the websites. So that is starving a lot of businesses of clicks, links. Obviously, they have adverts on their own sites that aren't necessarily being seen anymore, and therefore the revenues are taking a hit. And to the point that it has been sued now by News Corp, so owners of Wall Street Journal, amongst others. I think Condé Nast are also one of them, and various other publishers, significant publishers, are all trying to take away the ability of this organization. And it's quite a big one. It's got some significant backers. In fact, it's actually looking for another half of 500 million in investment right now to give it a valuation of 8 billion. So it's a reasonable sized player. And it's actually got some very cool functionality. But, and this is a kind of challenge with a lot of the sort of more open AI tools, they've got a problem in the kind of the veracity of their data and the fact that they've essentially got all of this information from various sources that the sources say has been taken illegally, essentially. And if I think it was Wired magazine, which is one of the Condé Nast ones, actually managed to get it to rewrite one of their articles that it obviously used as a source. And that has driven a lot of this sort of this legal challenges. I do think that this is something that is going to go away as a problem. I think that the challenges that all of these AIs face essentially is a challenge of money. How much are they going to end up paying these particular publishers to use their data? And you've seen this with OpenAI. They've gone around doing deals with loads and loads of publishers, and indeed now some film studios like Lionsgate and so on. So there's a lot of activity taking place. A lot of this is saber rattling, is trying to basically leverage as much as possible these content sources, leverage as much as possible their own power in order that they can essentially sell or license the data that they've produced and created and paid for, journalists, etc., to build. So yeah, I think it's not going to stop AI. Obviously, in terms of it's not going to put the horse back in the stable, but I do think that there'll probably be some casualties along the way. Some who haven't done it very smartly, and perhaps Perplexity is one. They haven't necessarily created an environment where these conversations can be had in a relaxed atmosphere. It's much more adversarial. But I do think that if you look at some of the bigger ones, you look at the Googles, you look at OpenAI, you look at X and various others, I think that they're going to be relatively protected because they're going to be able to throw a lot of money at these problems and make them go away. Yeah, Perplexity, really interesting, busy, and good, neat kit. But certainly in a bit of trouble right now because they do have a lot of lawyers breathing down their necks, even as they try and raise this 500 million of additional funding. Next on our technology and AI stories this week is randomly Michael Parkinson. Michael Parkinson, for those that probably are under 30, possibly even 40, was a chat show host from, I think, the end of the 60s to the 90s, possibly even into the early 2000s. Soft Yorkshire accent, generally quite genial, and he managed to get his interviewees to open up by just being really quite nice to them. So anyway, he had his eponymous chat show for many years and sadly passed away a few years ago. And that is probably why he shouldn't necessarily be featuring in this AI report this week. However, he, or at least his voice, is back. And it's back via AI. So he is going to be launching a new chat show, and it's his son who's obviously keeping the estate and has responsibility for the copywriting of his works and so on. He's licensed his voice to an AI company for them to create essentially an AI that will ask questions and chat in the style of Parky. So this Parky AI is now apparently looking for interviewees and actual real life celebrities that it can interview in the style of Michael Parkinson, and that they will then produce these interviews and release them and so on, as the son says, to give a new lease of life to Parkinson. Now, for those who are a little bit squeamish about AI, this probably feels a little bit uncomfortable, and particularly if you associate those that are squeamish with AI with those who are older and love Parky. However, I think this is probably a view into the future that we're going to need to get used to. Those that are fans of the Star Wars films will know that in the last trilogy, we had reanimated characters such as Peter Cushing coming back, who's Darth Vader's right-hand man, just as they're about to build the Death Star. So he came back for one of the subsequent films. There was a rejuvenated Princess Leia and and that was in Rogue One. And there's been a lot of this kind of activity where you see younger versions of actors reappearing in various films. But the fact that we can now create AIs that have a significant amount of data about a particular person, including what they look like and films of what they look like, then we are really soon going to see an explosion of long dead people coming back to life and being reanimated in terms of their ability on a screen. and then in future on holograms or robots to re-enter our lives, essentially. Really interesting story that Parkinson is coming back and that his son is supporting this particular AI. Looking forward to seeing and hearing what actually comes of it, and particularly interested in knowing who's going to want to be interviewed by him, because that's going to be almost as interesting as what the questions are. Next up on our AI and technology section, we're going to talk about Google Watermarks. Now, Google is pioneering the idea of these kind of little invisible watermarks on AI. So they're trying to make sure that essentially AI is always going to be trackable. You're always going to be able to see where it is present. Now, those that follow us know that here at Model Prop, we are absolutely obsessed with this idea of trust. We have our own little AI tick that goes on almost everything that we produce where AI is present. And for us, this kind of trust, and we've got a trust charter if you go onto the website and find it at the bottom of every screen. We're really passionate about the idea that the AI, you need AI that you can trust, and you need to understand where it is present and have a really good feel for it. So I like the idea of this. I worry, and obviously we've done a lot of work here ourselves, that it's going to be leaky in terms of people being able to A, remove them, B, not put them on in the first place for any other AIs out there, that essentially is going to be a bit left on the starting grid as everybody else just doesn't bother with it. Obviously our brand is very keen on it. It's very focused on this. We're very keen on ensuring that everybody knows where AI is. But I think like Google, we can see that everybody else isn't quite like that. And although it is an important brand for us, an important part of what we stand for, that yes, there will be others out there, and there are others out there that aren't necessarily doing it. A bravo from the perspective of good work, nice try. But yes, I don't think that people are going to be relying on watermarks because they're just too easy to get around. Yes, where you see those and where you do, keep an eye out for businesses that are trying to do this, because they tend to be the ethical ones and the ones that you're going to want to work with. But yes, as far as relying on them to tell you wherever AI is present, that's still going to be a very human activity, and you're going to have to use your own skill and judgment, right? Okay, so let's move on to our AI tool of the week. So this week's AI tool is a really fascinating one from Runway. It's called Act 1. Now, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, round about now, you will see what this looks like. And essentially, if I can describe it to those listening, I have fed in the video of this particular podcast that I'm producing right now, and have got Runway to overlay me with some various animated characters, some filmic characters, and essentially what it does is it will just help people to see me in a different light. And it's really fascinating to see how accurate they can make the kind of mannerisms, how you move your head, and so on. If you get a chance, it's on YouTube, probably popping out on LinkedIn as well. But it's a really interesting way of, reimagining how you do scenes. And pretty soon, we will start to see these kinds of tools really pushing through in videos for advertising, and perhaps in due course in films as well. But it's a really interesting tool. Have a look at it. I'm certain that there will be ways that we, Model Prop and elsewhere, look to introduce these and include these in various promotions for properties and for estate agencies going forward. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Just a real quick one about what's coming up in the week. The big thing, unsurprisingly, is the budget. Rachel Reeves will be up on her feet in a couple of days and will be telling us all about what she really is going to do with the government finances and how that's going to impact on the property market. So lots of doom and gloom. Oh my God, so much doom and gloom around about how it's going to impact everything. So there's been a lot of talk of everybody sitting on their hands and people waiting for this, that actually has stagnated the property market over the last few weeks a bit. So regardless, as with anything, certainty is a good thing. As soon as we know, we can just crack on. So gladly that will be out of the way in the next few days. And obviously we'll be returning to it next week to have a little summary of what we think it all means for all of us. So until then, thanks again for tuning in. Have wonderful weeks, and we will catch up with you again in 7 days' time. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.